Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We are wrapping up the last of our cloud security for solutions that are in Azure today. Although, I will preface that with saying we are constantly coming out with new defenders. So who knows, in the future, we might have to update with some other solutions that are coming out, because one of the ones we're talking about today is one of the newer ones that is in preview. So we are coming out with new ones. But we're going to talk about Defender for Resource Manager, Defender for DNS, and then finally the new Defender for Cloud's Threat Protection for AI workloads. So starting off with Defender for Resource Manager. What is Resource Manager? Well, if you are unfamiliar with Azure, Resource Manager is actually the back-end layer of it. It is the deployment and management service for Azure, and it creates or provides a management layer that enables you to create, update, and delete resources on your Azure account. Whenever you send a request through any of Azure's APIs, tools, SDKs, Resource Manager receives that request, and then it authenticates and authorizes the request before forwarding it on to the appropriate Azure service. And so because all the requests are handled by the same API, you're going to see consistent results and capabilities in every single tool. So it sits between the services that you're trying to get to, like, say, web app or a virtual machine or a data store or anything like that. Whenever you send a request, the Azure Resource Manager receives it and then forwards it on. Make sure that you have authentication and authorization for that resource. So you want to protect the Resource Manager for your Azure account. And that's what Defender for Resource Manager does. It automatically monitors the resource management operations and whether you're performing those operations through the portal, a REST API, Azure CLI, or Azure Programmatic Clients. It'll help protect that. And it does it by looking at things like malicious IP, any actions like disabling anti-malware, suspicious scripts that are running in VM extensions, or the use of any type of exploitation toolkits. And then, of course, looking at the activity if there's any lateral movement within the Azure management layer to other Azure resources and data planes. So just like a lot of these defenders, and this is a pretty common string, it's very easy to enable. You just want to enable it within your subscription, and then it protects the Resource Manager for that account. And then the alerts that are generated with it are going to be in the Defender for Cloud management area. But of course, you can always forward those to Sentinel for free. It's one of the included data sources. And then, of course, now you can hook Sentinel into your security center, which will then give you the comprehensive unified SOC experience where you're going to get your other Defender alerts and that true XDR correlation of not only your cloud alerts as well as your M3.
As a reminder, Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. However, as I always mention, we do this show on our own time and on our own dime. That said, exciting to start to come near the end of our cloud security series, Andy, and we've got some interesting ones today. Now, I will say, if you really listen to what Andy just described, as far as what Azure Resource Manager does, you may realize in your mind that that is possibly the most sensitive resource of everything in Azure, because it's the keys to the kingdom. It controls everything else. It's where I can start or stop services, spin up new services, change permissions to services, of course, if I have permission in the first place. It is something you absolutely must protect, because if you think of security in terms of that layered approach, I need to protect the most sensitive layers before I can protect the underlying layers as well. If you don't protect Azure Resource Manager and it gets taken over, well, then it becomes possible for bad actors to disable other security protections along the way. So really, really fundamental that you protect this, and very reasonable cost to do so. This is one of those services that is very reasonable for what you get and the peace of mind it gives you, and to use a overused phrase in security, it really does help you sleep at night because it ensures that any operations in Azure Resource Manager, which again is that fundamental control plane of all resources in Azure, is secure. And if there's any anomalous behavior, you are alerted or it is stopped in its tracks before you're even able to take human speed reaction because protections happen at machine speed. So definitely one of those you should strongly consider going to turn on. As Andy mentioned, deployment is literally flipping a switch. So head over to your Defender for Cloud portal, look at your subscriptions, and enable Defender for Resource Manager right away. Strongly, strongly recommend.
Another really easy one is this next one, Defender for DNS. And what that does is essentially gives you another layer of protection for any resources that are using Azure DNS and Azure's provided name resolution capability. So if you are using any of the network capabilities, like an Azure network or subnet or anything like that, by default, you're going to use Azure's DNS unless you specify your own. And sometimes you do. Sometimes you specify like a domain controller or maybe an external name resolution. But by default, you use Azure DNS. And if you have any resources that are using that, then you want to flip on Defender for DNS. And what that does is very simple. It detects any type of suspicious or anomalous activity like data exfiltration from your Azure resources using DNS tunneling, malware communication with CNC servers, DNS attacks like communication with malicious DNS servers, or any type of communication with domains that are used for malicious activity like phishing or crypto mining. And there's a whole slew of other alerts. But this is a passive service like many of the things in Defender for Cloud that will just alert you to when there's malicious activity that we suspect based on our threat intelligence. And then you'll get those alerts just like the other ones in the Defender for Cloud portal. As such, you can then forward them to other services as needed. Yeah, again, very simple to flip on. Just turn it on, and then you're just going to start getting protection for anything that's using Azure DNS.
Andy, I really liked that you partnered this with Defender for Azure Resource Manager. Here we're talking about Defender for DNS because it is similar in the fact that it's super foundational. Hey, Andy, real quick, if there's an outage somewhere, what usually causes it?
It's always DNS.
It's always DNS, right? Well, these are more malicious things than outages. However, if you listen to what Andy walked through as some of the protections you get here, communications with domains used for phishing or crypto mining, obviously can be very expensive if you have a phishing attack you fall to, or someone's used your Azure resources to mine crypto. Definitely something you don't want. Malware communicating with command and control servers, if we can cut it off at the knees right there, that really limits the blast radius of an attack. Data exfiltration, obviously very sophisticated attack if someone's doing data exfil with DNS tunneling, very hard to detect. So very nice to have that protection in place. So one of those things, again, we see is extremely foundational. But if you're protecting things like Resource Manager and DNS, you're really covering your bases in a way you may not have had in the past. So again, super easy to deploy, single switch to turn it on, can turn it on a subscription by subscription basis. Highly recommend you enable this one as well. Definitely some great foundational protection. And it may not be the most common kind of attacks you get hit with, but if you listen to the sophistication level to pull off some of those attacks, they would be the types of attacks you may not know about or may have a difficulty detecting otherwise. And those are the ones that are the most insidious, and we want to make sure we have the best protections against. Highly recommend Defender for DNS.
Yeah, my favorite haiku is a DNS haiku. It's not DNS. There's no way it's DNS. It was DNS.
It's always DNS.
Yep. All right. Finally, to wrap this up here, one of our newest protections, which is Defender for Cloud's threat protection for AI workloads. It is in a limited public preview status currently for the commercial cloud as well, only. And you have to sign up via a registration form. So we will post the documentation for this. The registration form is there. You have to sign up for it. And once you do, and your tenant is onboarded, you'll get a new toggle within Defender for Cloud, which then you can toggle on for this new threat protection for AI workloads. And what this does is it identifies threats to generative AI applications in real time and it'll help you respond to any type of security issues around that. It works with Azure AI Content Safety Prompt Shields and Microsoft's Threat Intelligence to provide security alerts for threats like data leakage, data poisoning, jailbreak, credential theft, and so on and so forth. And of course, it does integrate with Defender XDR if you are using that, which allows you to centralize all of your alerts within the Defender XDR portal. And that's one of the key things, because we have been moving towards this unified SOC experience within the Defender portal for probably over a year now, I feel like. And, we had this separate Sentinel and XDR experience, and now Sentinel and everything falls under the XDR portal. There's pretty much feature parity. I can't really think of a whole lot of things. I mean, for some of the workbooks and playbooks, it still pivots over to Azure, but you can have that centralized experience with everything that you need right there. And of course, if you click on the link, it might pivot over. But for the most part, XDR, the Defender XDR portal, is where you're going to get everything that you need for responding to your security alerts. And the supported services for this Defender for threat protection and AI workloads is the Azure OpenAI supported models, and then anything in the Azure AI model inference service supported model. And again, very simple to enable. It's a toggle in your subscription once your tenant is onboarded to the public preview. When you enable the plan, you can also control whether alerts include suspicious segments from your user prompts or the model responses from your AI applications and resources. So when you go into the environmental settings for the threat protection for AI workloads, there is a separate toggle if you want to do this. You can enable user prompt evidence, which will consist of the user prompts as well as the model responses, which are both considered your organization's data. And that evidence will be available through the Azure portal, Defender portal, and any other partner integrations. So that's up to you whether or not you want to include it, but it's there if you do. And I think a lot of times that can be extremely beneficial for threat alerting and data protection.
This is part of a holistic strategy to help organizations really wrap their arms around AI applications and feel comfortable with them, that you have the appropriate protections and monitoring in place. Now, to be fair, this is specifically for what I would call internal AI applications. Maybe that you intend to be external facing to work with your customers, but they're built in-house. So this isn't for something like ChatGPT Enterprise or M3 Copilot or for Security Copilot. This is for, we're Contoso, a major retailer, and we want to put a chatbot on our webpage that helps coach customers through their purchases. That's what this is for. It's for that model. Or we're an electric company and we want to build a model that customers can ask questions about their bill to. Those sorts of things, those kind of experiences. Or it's an internal system that's going to allow our people, if we're a law firm, to ask questions about a previous case precedent, as an example. So think of bespoke applications that are built in-house and built on either the Azure OpenAI service or the Azure AI Model Inference service. That's what this is for. So not those off-the-shelf solutions, just so we're clear. But customers ask all the time about these risks because they've identified there's an OWASP top 10 now for AI models, and they include things like data poisoning and jailbreaking. This is where you get that protection. And you get that confidence that those attempted malicious prompts are being blocked, and you can capture them, and you can even go follow up on them, depending on if it was an internal or external actor as appropriate. So this is very, very helpful for those experiences and wrapping your arms around it. And again, it's part of a broader strategy, right? Because you're going to need different tools for each situation. In Microsoft Purview, there are tools for understanding potential security risks in your ChatGPT Enterprise or M365 Copilot. That's a separate thing. If you want to know about people attempting to use those models for malicious purposes, not necessarily jailbreaking or data poisoning, but say they want to commit money laundering or they want to commit workplace violence, and they're asking like M365 Copilot for help in planning a violence event. You want to know about that too. That's communications compliance in Purview. So just so we're clear, there's a range of solutions for everything you want to do, but they're going to be tailored to those experiences, because using a SaaS solution off the shelf, like M365 Copilot or ChatGPT Enterprise, protecting that is a different thing than there is protecting your own bespoke AI models that you're putting out in the world, either your internal world or external facing to your customers. And that's what this helps you protect. So it's part of that broader strategy to be aware of. And then, there's a partner capabilities here that help your developers as they're developing those solutions, make sure they're making good choices around that with things like AI security posture management. And they're designing those applications in the right way with the right permissions as well. And that's part of Defender CSPM. So Defender Cloud Security Posture Management, we've talked about on this show in the past. There are new capabilities in there for AI security posture management, helping ensure that any AI applications you've deployed in Azure or AWS or GCP have appropriate permissions and controls and design in place. This is specifically once we've got that posture secured and that application stood up and running, now let's understand all those different prompts we're seeing and make sure that they're safe and being used in an appropriate way. So I feel like I made this more complex than it needs to be, but I just want to clarify as you're thinking through, well, I need to do this, and this. Everyone's trying to do a lot in a short period of time right now. Making sure we're running after the right things and choosing the right tool for the job is more important than ever. And I just want to clarify what this is really good at doing, which is, again, helping protect those bespoke internal apps.
Yeah, a really good call out. And as we wrap up kind of the cloud security portion of this series, the whole thing was really kicked off with that CNAP overview, Cloud Native Application Workload
Protection
Platform, right? CNAP. And so what that whole idea is if you are developing applications, you need them to run somewhere. So each one of these Defender for whatever, APIs, storage, databases, those are workloads that you're going to be hosting your applications in. Now, a lot of people don't think of it like that when it comes to like VMs, because that's kind of the biggest one. But some people do host applications on VMs. But then there's all these other things that developers use, like APIs, like DNS, like databases, and so on and so forth, that will host these workloads. And how do you protect that in the cloud? And so that's what these defenders are for. Just like this threat protection for AI workloads, if you are developing things with AI and you're using Azure OpenAI, then this is how you would protect it. Just not the same thing as those SaaS models that Adam talked about. And then as we wrap this up, we are going to do some more shows on DevOps, specifically security. So how do we protect that CI/CD pipeline, where we're not just talking about the workloads themselves, but how do you protect the entire pipeline from code to deployment? And so that's kind of the intent of the cloud security. But as we wrap this up, this is mostly on just the workload as you host that stuff within Azure. Take those same concepts, if you don't use Azure, to wherever you're hosting your workloads. Like if it is in AWS, a lot of these have multi-cloud capabilities within Azure, but AWS has its own security as well. So maybe you're looking at just AWS and how do you protect those workloads there. GCP probably has its own as well. But these concepts, we have very specific solutions that Adam and I are familiar with, but we want you to take these concepts and think about where you're hosting your workloads and think, well, am I actually protecting that? Like, how am I protecting it? So that's really the intent of the whole series. So hopefully that's what you're taking away from it as we wrap this up.
Really great call out, Andy. And you kind of touched on, and I want to unpack just a little bit more here since we have a little bit of time. You kind of mentioned without really explaining it, which was great because you did it so organically, the concept of cloud modernization. So initially when customers move stuff to the cloud, they do what we call a lift and shift, where you take a bunch of applications that are running on premises today. And again, when they're running on premises, they're not componentized. They're not split into microservices. They're very monolithic. This is an x86 application that runs on an x86 server, and maybe it calls a SQL database, but that's about the extent of the complexity of it. So we're going to lift and shift that, and instead of running it in a VM on our metal in our data center or colo, we're going to move it into Azure, and we're going to do the exact same thing. However, once you do that, now it opens opportunities to modernize those applications. And that's where, Andy, you were unpacking. There's all of these different resources in Azure that are PaaS solutions where they're managed in some ways by Microsoft, but there's still a lot of flexibility for you as the customer to use them to fit your needs. However, a lot of the care and feeding and the non-value add part, you don't have to manage that part. Things like Azure Cosmos DB or even Azure SQL Database are PaaS solutions where you don't have to do all the patching and all this non-value add stuff, but there's this very similar to what you're familiar with, but you get all those cloud benefits along with it, and you don't have to manage the underlying OS, you don't have to do patch management, so on and so forth. That's that modernization journey where cloud native applications, they leverage all these PaaS services, and they have these microservices architecture where they're split amongst all of them. So while if you're depending where you're at in your cloud modernization journey, initially maybe it is fine that everything still runs as x86 code on Windows Server or Linux servers. So all I really need is VM protection. I need like a Defender for servers, Defender for endpoint equivalent. And I don't need to protect all these other things. And maybe that's true initially when you do that lift and shift. But as you modernize over time, you're going to move away from the model of this is code that runs on a VM to I have all these different services that work together to deliver an application experience. I'm going to run an app service in Cosmos DB, so on and so forth across the Azure infrastructure, again, or equivalent in AWS or GCP. And that application starts to look really different. And then how I defend that also starts to look really different. And so that's what our goal was to empower you, our listeners and viewers, is have that idea in your mind that as you're working with your development teams and as you are modernizing applications for the cloud, you already know how you're going to defend them. You're going to turn on these defenders for the various services. You're going to enable them at a subscription level and then tell your app dev team, hey, go nuts. As you spin up new resources, they're automatically protected. And that gives you that peace of mind to know all those alerts are flowing in Defender for Cloud and Defender XDR, and you know already where to go to defend them. And you don't have to do anything new as new services are onboarded over time, which enables that really rapid pace of development that cloud enables. And so you can move faster and your app dev teams can move faster and everyone's happy with that. And so that's what we're empowering you to do. And again, we'll talk about the Microsoft stuff because it's what we know. But Andy mentioned there are equivalent services in other hyperscaler cloud providers like GCP and AWS. And this is where you can bring that awareness and say, oh gosh, maybe GCP doesn't have an equivalent there. And you go, hey, could we run this workload in Azure? I'm more comfortable with it because I know there's the defense tools in place that I would feel comfortable with as a security professional. And that's where you can help influence those decisions over time and make your life easier because those services are defended by default. And that is a differentiator with Microsoft. Like, this isn't a sales pitch. This is just a fact of Amazon is not a security company, and Google has a security component. They did buy, oh my gosh, Mandiant, thank you, and has been expanding their security footprint, but it's not to the point of Microsoft. Microsoft is the largest security vendor in the world by market share and by revenues. Those are just facts. Those aren't, up for debate. And so as security defenders, one of the differentiators of Azure is it's the only hyperscaler cloud that's also a security company, in fact, the largest security company in the world. And so we really want to partner with our security customers and security teams to make sure they feel really comfortable running stuff in Azure, and we're delivering all the tools they need to feel confident with it. So that is a differentiator. It's something you can think about and you can talk about internally in your own organizations, but just something to be aware of that does, if you see them as like, well, it's Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler, like there's no difference between the three. There are, right? When you dig in a little deeper. And I think that's one differentiator for Microsoft for sure. So just something to be aware of as you go through your evaluation.
The other thing, as you talk about this, that I just want to mention as kind of the cherry on top is that we eat our own dog food. When we talk about all these things, some of the things Adam and I have mentioned the Secure Future Initiative as things have tightened down. As a technical specialist, I used to have access to kind of a Wild Wild West demo tenant. That's all gone. My demo tenants are extremely locked down. I am required to have all of these defenders turned on if I'm using Azure. And then whenever we get alerts, because sometimes, I've gotten those bad boys alerts as a security person. I've, accidentally run Mimikatz or something like that. And that immediately kicks off an alert to the security team. And they send a screenshot of the alert from Defender XDR.
And you know
to
what
my
that's all
boss.
built on, Andy?
What's
Logic apps.
Oh, yeah.
That's all built on Logic apps. Like you talked about eating our dog food. So I was just going to mention that too. That's all like Sentinel plus Logic apps plus Defender XDR.
And they send a screenshot of the alert with all the investigation from the Defender XDR portal to my boss and myself. And they're like, hey, here's something you're doing that's suspicious and you need to fix it. And so I don't know if, maybe of course, our physical firewalls, right? I think it's not uncommon to know. I think we use other vendors to do that because Microsoft doesn't manufacture firewalls. So we have a combination probably somewhere of like Cisco, but a lot of them are Palo Alto and so on and so forth. But we don't have that particular component. But then of course, everything else on the software side, we use Defender. So like on our workstations, the only thing we have installed is Defender. We don't have any external XDR. So email is protected by Defender for Office. So like all of these things that we're talking about, this is what we use to protect our internal resources as well as our customer stuff.
Everything Microsoft makes runs on Azure, with like the sole exception that still runs on bare metal, I believe, is Exchange Online. I think Exchange Online still runs on bare metal, but everything else literally runs in Azure. We had a in our like little buddy chat that we do kind of outside of work, but with our work buddies, we are talking about I'm trying to think, I don't want to say too much here, but it was talking about some internal product development. And they were very specifically talking about different Azure resources that this product used as part of its design. And it was kind of surprising. I forget this sometimes, to see the view behind the curtain. And it really is, it's all these Azure services running together to deliver what's a SaaS solution to the end customer. But under the hood, it's using all the same stuff. Like it's literally running in Azure on these Azure services. We don't like give ourselves special permissions or private APIs or build stuff in our own way. Like it all runs on the native Azure Resource Manager and all the Azure resources, same as any customer application. 1000% eat our own dog food and run everything on Azure. Again, with there's like onesie twosie exceptions that are still running on bare metal, but almost everything else is.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thank you for sticking with us through this cloud security series, and we'll keep you updated on anything else that's new. We're going to follow up with some DevOps security as well. But
this is our last show for the year, right, Andy? This is going to get posted December 31st, I believe.
I think so. We have a bunch that are queued up. So
yeah,
definitely.
I was looking. This is the 31st. So
okay. Well,
so let's say Happy New Year.
Yeah. Had a great Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right. Well, our contact information, as well as the show's documentation for the links for everything that we used for the show, will be in the show notes. Reach out if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next year.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.